The world remembers BROLY in jagged pieces, stories told as tremors, as sky-scorched canyons and oceans boiled into salt, as a child's scream folded into the roar of a planet going mad. He was born wrong and born right. Wrong according to Saiyan law and the cold calculations of kings. Right in the sense that the universe, when faced with a problem too large for its architects, sometimes births a force that refuses to be catalogued. BROLY's power was a horizon. The further you approached it, the more it stretched away. That was his first lesson. Potential was not a limit, it was an instruction. He carried those contradictions like a wound. The Saiyan blood in him was a ladder of violence and honor. The mutation that made him the legendary Super Saiyan made every rung brighter, more unstable. Where other fighters practiced technique, BROLY's technique was novelty, an improvised geometry of fists and grief, and a will that did not know when to stop becoming. Every near death was fertilizer for him. Each burst of fury rearranged his cells, his ki, his very metabolism. He evolved not by analysis, but by the raw arithmetic of survival. Pain plus rage equaled growth. That pattern is crucial to everything that follows. It is the seed of the philosophical argument that will decide the battle. Doomsday walked the opposite path, a lesson in manufactured absolutes. Forged by cruelty and repetition, he is the universe's coarse answer to endurance. Where BROLY grows through potential, Doomsday grows through negation. Kill him, the mechanism learns. Kill him in 100 ways. The mechanism restructures itself to render those deaths inert. He is an evolutionary lock forged to fit only one key: annihilation. He is not a creature of becoming, but of becoming immune to what has already been. His existence is a mirror to a sterile logic. Finality is the only teacher, and repetition is progress. Those differences set the stage for a confrontation that is not merely two bodies colliding, but two metaphysical strategies clashing. BROLY's growth is open-ended, an exponential series where each term multiplies the last. Doomsday's growth is corrective, a closed system that subtracts failure until nothing remains to subtract. One seeks the infinite by accumulation, the other seeks imperviousness by subtraction. Philosophically, we can reduce the argument to two competing claims. Claim A, adaptive immunity. If you can be made invulnerable by evolving against everything you face, then invulnerability trumps raw potential. Claim B, undecidable potential. If power can escalate beyond any given adaptation, then adaptation is a temporary shelter against a process that never stops increasing. The first is Doomsday's doctrine. The second is BROLY's. But there is a third, quieter idea that matters because it determines the arc of a battle, the role of intentionality. Doomsday has no intention beyond destruction. His evolution is reactive and deterministic. BROLY, even in his feral moments, is driven by something closer to intentional transcendence. Rage is not merely reflexive for him. Rage is fuel that he channels into a purpose he did not choose, but practices like prayer. That latent teleology gives his growth a different structural quality. It is not simply more power, it is power organized toward transcendence. That organization will matter because adaptation can neutralize patterns, but it cannot predict or preempt a change in the rules of engagement itself. The universe that contains them is impartial. It does not care which argument wins. It only demands that the opponent prove, through force and consequence, which metaphysical claim has primacy. This is the trial. Will endless correction secure an absolute asylum against danger, or will a living, growing potential overwhelm the very mechanism designed to stop it? The answer will not be discovered through theory alone. It will be hammered out in heat, radiation, and broken rock. The background makes clear what each figure carries. Doomsday, an engineered end. BROLY, an unending ascent. Both are answers to annihilation, but only one can reframe the question. When they meet, it will not be on a field of honor. It will be where the fabric of reality is thin enough that raw force can write new rules. BROLY will not simply try to destroy Doomsday, he will try to outbecome him. Doomsday will not simply try to survive, he will try to convert BROLY into another failed experiment. The world between them will be collateral, a theater stripped of metaphor. But within that theater, the philosophical argument will take a body. That is what Chapter 2 will show. Not merely who breaks whom, but which logic is the stronger ontology in the face of absolute violence. The sky above the ruined planet split like an opening wound when they arrived. BROLY's arrival was a comet of living heat. Doomsday's was a pressure wave that made mountains sigh and fold. They met where continents had been ground to dust, an arena suffused with the memory of catastrophe. BROLY's scream braided with the ambient howl of a dying atmosphere. Doomsday's presence simplified the air into a single imperative: terminate. They circled as predators do when two apex forces test the other's rhythm. BROLY's muscles were taut, his aura a visible storm, ki spilling from him in torrents that warred with gravity. Doomsday moved with a low, inevitable tempo, each step a recalibration of mass and bone. When they struck, the first blows were earthquakes. BROLY's fists were meteorites that smashed into Doomsday's plates. Doomsday absorbed and returned with a crushing force that pulverized BROLY's armor of flesh. Energy flared into a pale dawn. The satellite's fragments sang as they were vaporized, but this was only the beginning. BROLY's power rose like an integer that insists on becoming the next highest value. Each injury rewired his physiology. Each backlash fed his ki until his aura became a small cosmos. He adapted by expansion. Where Doomsday's body patched and armored itself, BROLY's body reorganized into new geometries of force. He stopped punching. He began to rearrange physics within a sphere around him. Gravity tilted, time hiccuped, and energy condensed into spearheads of potential that pierced Doomsday's hide and then flowed into him like light into stone. Doomsday's response was textbook adaptation. Where BROLY struck with compiled potential, Doomsday synthesized resistances. Horns grew into blades that channeled kinetic return. Plates stiffened into lattices of deflection, and regenerative fissures closed as if the planet itself taught him new sutures. For a moment it seemed the old verdict, the machine learning of violence, would hold. Doomsday turned BROLY's assault back with brutal arithmetic. Neutralize the last attack, make a new one irrelevant. BROLY roared, and something like comprehension flickered in the battle. He was not merely enraged. In the way that only the truly transcendent can be, his rage sharpened into clarity. He understood the loop Doomsday learned from what had been. So BROLY stopped feeding the loop with repetitions. He stopped hitting Doomsday in the ways that could be catalogued. He began to create. Each motion became an experiment in novelty. One swing became a cascade of variable inputs, feral feints, key modulations that were not mere power, but informational complexity. He fragmented his attacks across scales, microscopic pulses of energy that altered Doomsday's cellular signaling, chaotic fields that interrupted regenerative algorithms, and then, crucially, an offering, an intentional overload. That offering was not mercy, it was a tactical inversion. BROLY pushed every ounce of his potential into a single, paradoxical act. He became an environment. His ki expanded, not to crush, but to envelop, to saturate Doomsday's form with a living flux that did not merely damage, but rewrote the inputs Doomsday's adaptation relied upon. Doomsday's system needed discrete failures to correct. BROLY flooded him with non-discrete novelties, patterns that had never existed in the data Doomsday had learned from. The result was computational panic. The corrective loops collided and could not converge. Doomsday responded with sheer force, a tearing of landscape and logic. He struck with the blunt certainty of an inevitability that has no other language. He hit BROLY until BROLY's body resembled a ruin. Yet with every shattering, BROLY reassembled on a different axis. His growth was no longer merely accrual. It was qualitative metamorphosis. Where Doomsday expected repetition, BROLY offered unpredictable creativity. Each blow that failed to terminate BROLY fed a new kind of power, one that was not simply more violent but more complex. The philosophical hinge opened wide in the middle of that conflict. Doomsday embodied the claim that endless correction can neutralize any threat. BROLY embodied the claim that open-ended potential can always outstrip closed-system adaptation. The battle turned into a test of whether adaptation can accommodate novelty that changes the rules of measurement. Doomsday's physiology, brilliant in its reductive logic, had no apparatus to adapt to a flood of emergent possibilities that were not variants of prior attacks, but new ontologies of assault. In the final sweep, BROLY stopped trying to smash Doomsday into pieces. He became a force that rendered Doomsday's measuring tools useless. He braided his Kai into a singularity of becoming an active potential that reframed causality. Doomsday attempted his final stratagem, eradicate the novelty by annihilating its source. He drove his spines into BROLY's chest and pushed a maelstrom of anti-Patton's old ways. Perfected, for a moment, it seemed the old law would hold. But BROLY's heart, a furnace of living possibility, detonated in a way that was not death but transformation. The explosion did not reduce Doomsday to nothing. It overloaded his adaptive matrix with such unprecedented raw self-directed potential that the mechanism began to fold in on itself. To adapt, Doomsday needed a prior model. BROLY provided none. When the dust settled, the world had been rewritten. Doomsday lay on the ground not as rubble but as an object that no longer functioned under the rules that had birthed it. His bones and armor were intact, but the process that had always resolved him into a next improved form had been interrupted. Rather than resurrect into a Doomsday immune to BROLY's last attack, his system stalled, caught in a liminal calculus between updates. Without a model of the new variables, the adaptation became paralysis. BROLY stood amid ruin and silence, breathing like a god who had learned new words. He had not merely crushed Doomsday's body, he had demonstrated that a living, self-directed creative potential could so overwhelm a corrective evolutionary system that the system's privilege, its certainty, was negated. That was the philosophical victory. Potential that organizes itself toward transcendence can outpace and disrupt adaptation that relies solely on correction. When Doomsday finally ceased to move, it was not because his bones failed or his armor cracked. It was because the mechanism that had always guaranteed his return could not interpret the new input set BROLY represented. He did not die to the same calculation twice. He died because the calculation could not process the thing that had become more than a threat, an irreducible novelty. BROLY walked away, not as a predator triumphant in the old sense, but as a force that had redefined the battlefield's metrics. The winner was established not by brute-proof immortality, but by the power to change what counts as an attack, to become a process impossible to assimilate into the opponent's corrective grammar. That is how BROLY won, by turning himself into an answer Doomsday had no question for, and in that unmapped space, BROLY's becoming was absolute.